Hello, and welcome back to another Python programming tutorial on Shay's Tech Academy. In this video, we'll be discussing nested for loops in Python. Nested for loops can be very useful when working with lists, matrices, or other nested data structures. In Python, nested for loops are a way to perform repetitive tasks that involve multiple levels of iteration. They are used when we need to iterate over elements within another loop. Let's say we have a list of colors and a list of fruits, and we want to print out all possible combinations of colors and fruits. We can use nested for loops to achieve this. Here's an example. The code creates two lists, colors and fruits, which contain different elements. Then it uses nested for loops to iterate over the elements of both lists. The outer loop iterates over each color in the colors list. For each color, the inner loop iterates over each fruit in the fruits list. Inside the inner loop, the combination of the current color and fruit is printed using the print statement. The output will be all possible combinations of colors and fruits, as shown below in the console. Iterating over a 2D list with nested for loops. When we say iterating over a 2D list with nested for loops, it means using multiple for loops to traverse and access the elements of a two-dimensional list or nested list. In a two-dimensional list, each element is itself a list, forming a matrix-like structure. By using nested for loops, we can iterate through each row and column of the 2D list to access and perform operations on individual elements. Here's an example to illustrate iterating over a 2D list with nested for loops. In this example, we have a 2D list called matrix with 3 rows and 3 columns. Using nested for loops, the outer loop iterates over each row, and the inner loop iterates over each element within that row. The print statement is used to display each element of the 2D list. By using nested for loops, we can access and process each element in the 2D list and perform specific operations as needed. Let's take a look at multiplying each element in two lists using the nested for loop scenario. When we say multiplying each element in two lists, it means performing a multiplication operation between corresponding elements of two lists and generating a new list with the results. Here's an example of multiplying each element in two lists using nested for loops in Python. Let's explain what we are doing here. We have two lists, list 1 and list 2. We then initialize an empty list called result to store the multiplied values. We then use a for loop to iterate over the indices of the lists. We use rangeLen list1 to get the indices since both lists have the same length. Inside the loop, we access the elements at the current index from list 1 and list 2 and multiply them together. We store the result in the multiplied variable. We then append the multiplied value to the result list. After the loop, we print the result list, which contains the multiplied values. Finding the intersection of two lists. Finding the intersection of two lists can be useful in various scenarios, for example. Let's take an example from data analysis point of view to explain. When working with datasets or collections of data, you may need to identify common elements between two lists. For example, finding the common set of keywords, tags, or categories present in two different datasets. Another scenario where such situation be useful would be when filtering data. You can use the intersection to filter out elements from one list based on their presence in another list. This can be helpful when you want to extract only the relevant or common elements from a larger dataset. Here's an example. In this example, we have two lists, list 1 and list 2. We iterate over each element in list 1, and for each element, we iterate over each element in list 2. If we find a common element, we add it to the intersection list. Finally, we print the intersection list, which contains the common elements found in both lists. Iterating over a dictionary with nested for loops. Iterating over a dictionary with nested for loops refers to the process of accessing and iterating through the key-value pairs in a dictionary using multiple for loops. In Python, dictionaries are unordered collections of key-value pairs, and by using nested for loops, you can traverse the dictionary's elements and perform operations on each key-value pair. The outer loop iterates over the dictionary's keys, while the inner loop iterates over the corresponding values for each key. This allows you to access both the keys and values of the dictionary simultaneously within the loop. Here's an example to illustrate iterating over a dictionary with nested for loops. Let's see what is going on here. So we have a dictionary called student_scores that contains the names of students as keys and their corresponding scores as values. We use the outer for loop to iterate over the keys, students, in the student_scores dictionary. Within the outer loop, we print the name of the student. We use the inner for loop to iterate over the values, scores, of each student. We access the scores by using the key student to retrieve the list of scores associated with that student. Within the inner loop, we print each score. This example demonstrates how we can iterate over a dictionary with nested for loops to access and process the values of each key-value pair. In this case, we are iterating over the student names and their respective scores, allowing us to perform operations or calculations based on the individual scores. Let's finish off this lesson by giving you a real-world example how and where this topic of nested for loops can be helpful. You might understand better that way. We start by creating a list called guests, which contains the names of the guests who will be attending an event or gathering. You can modify this list to include any number of guests. We create another list called tables, which represents the available tables at the venue. You can modify this list to match the actual tables at your event. We create an empty list called seating_arrangement, where we will store the combinations of guests and tables. Here, we use nested for loops to iterate over each table and each guest. For each combination of guest and table, we create a seating arrangement string using string interpolation f, guest, table. We then append this seating arrangement to the seating_arrangement list. The line seating ff, guest, table is using f-string formatting to create a seating arrangement string. It combines the name of a guest and the table they are assigned to, separated by a hyphen. Finally, we iterate over each seating arrangement in the seating_arrangement list and print it. This displays the assigned tables for each guest. Now the question is how and in what sense this could be applicable. This scenario of generating a seating arrangement is applicable in various events, such as weddings, conferences, or dinners, where guests need to be assigned tables. The nested for loops allow us to generate all possible combinations of guests and tables, ensuring that each guest is assigned to a specific table. The resulting seating arrangement can be used for organizing the event and providing a smooth experience for the attendees. Well, that's it for this tutorial. I hope you found this informative and useful. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to keep up with the new tutorials. Let's catch up in the next lesson.